dusty corners of history. It's time to settle in, dim those lights, and maybe grab a blanket or a warm drink, whatever gets you in that cozy bedtime vibe. If you've got a fan humming softly in the background, even better, let that gentle buzz carry you back to a time when the world was a little darker, a little grittier. I'm your guide tonight, and if you love these historical journeys, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from: London, New York, or maybe somewhere a bit more mysterious. Tonight, we're stepping into the shadows of a medieval city where assassins, spies, and thieves ruled the night. Forget the cloaked heroes of video games or the suave killers of Hollywood. The real medieval underworld. It was raw, it was dangerous, and honestly, it kinda sucked to be part of it. Let's dive in. Picture this, it's the dead of night in a medieval city, sometime in the 13th century. The air is thick with the scent of rain, and the cobblestone streets glisten under a thin sheen of water, reflecting the faint, flickering glow of lanterns swinging outside a tavern. You're standing in a narrow alley, the kind so cramped you can touch both walls if you stretch out your arms. The stones beneath your feet are uneven, slick, threatening to trip you if you're not careful. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the clatter of boots, a watchman making his rounds, his lantern casting long, wobbly shadows that dance across the walls. You pull your cloak tighter, the damp wool heavy on your shoulders, smelling faintly of mildew and smoke. Every sound feels amplified, the drip of water from a leaky gutter, the muffled laughter spilling out from the tavern, the creak of a shutter as someone peers into the night. You're not here by chance. You're waiting. Watching. Because in this city, the night belongs to those who move unseen. This is the medieval underworld, a world that thrived in the cracks of feudal society. While lords feasted in their stone keeps and peasants toiled in the fields, a different kind of Livia, a shadowy network of assassins, spies, and thieves operated in the margins. These weren't the dashing rogues of legend, slipping through castles with a wink and a dagger. No, these were men and women who lived on the edge, where one wrong move could mean a noose, a blade, or worse, betrayal by the very people they trusted. Taverns like the one across the street weren't just places to grab a mug of ale, they were hubs for whispered deals, coded messages, and the kind of business that didn't survive the light of day. You'd see a hooded figure slip a coin to a barmaid who'd nod toward a back room. Or a thief eyeing a drunken merchant, waiting for the perfect moment to lift a purse. And somewhere in the shadows, an assassin was memorizing a face, a name, or routine, knowing that their next job could be their last. Let's put you in their shoes for a moment. Imagine you're one of them, a thief, maybe, or a spy sent to eavesdrop on a noble's late-night meeting. You're crouched behind a stack of barrels, the cold seeping into your bones, your breath fogging in the chilly air. The smell of damp wool clings to you, mixing with the faint stench of rotting vegetables from a nearby market stall. Your heart's pounding, not just because of the cold, but because every moment you're out here, you're gambling with your life. That creak you just heard, was it a hidden door swinging open, or just the wind rattling a loose board? You can't afford to find out. One wrong step, one glance from a suspicious guard, and you're done. The watchman's boots are getting closer now, his lantern swinging like a pendulum. You press yourself flatter against the wall, praying the shadows hold you tight. This was no game. This was survival, and the fear of discovery was a constant companion, coiled tight in your chest. What made this world so gripping wasn't just the danger, it was the stakes. These weren't random acts of violence or petty thefts. The underworld was a web, tangled up in the power struggles of the medieval world. A noble who wanted a rival gone might hire an assassin to slip poison into a chalice. A merchant guild might pay a spy to steal a rival's trade secrets. Even kings weren't above it, whispered orders sent to shadowy figures to ensure a troublesome bishop didn't make it to the next council. Every job was a thread in a larger tapestry, one that could shift alliances, topple dynasties, or spark wars. And you, lurking in that alley, were part of it, whether you liked it or not. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on you, heavier than the rain-soaked cloak on your back. Let's zoom out for a second and talk about what this city was like. Medieval cities weren't the sprawling metropolises we know today. They were cramped, chaotic, and honestly, a bit gross. Take a place like London or Florence in the 1200s, maybe 20,000 people packed into a square mile, houses leaning so close together they practically kissed. Streets were narrow, often unpaved, turning into rivers of mud when it rained. At night, most of the city went dark, save for the glow of a few lanterns or the occasional torch carried by a brave or foolish soul. The darkness was both a curse and a blessing for someone like you. It hit you, sure, but it also hit everyone else. A friend could become a foe in the blink of an eye, and trust was a currency rarer than gold. Now, let's talk about that tavern glowing across the street. It's not just a backdrop, it's a character in this story. Taverns were the beating heart of the underworld, places where deals were struck and fates were sealed. Picture a low-ceilinged room, smoky from a fire that never quite warmed the place. The air thick with the smell of spilled ale, roasted meat, and unwashed bodies. A bard strumming a lute in the corner, half drunk, while a group of mercenaries argue over dice. You're at a table in the back, hood up, nursing a cup of watered-down wine. The barmaid knows your trouble. She's seen your type before, but she doesn't ask questions. Not when there's a coin in it for her. You catch her eye, and she jerks her head toward a door half hidden behind a tattered curtain. That's where the real business happens. A creak, a step, and you're in a world where words are weapons and silence is survival. What's wild is how organized this chaos could be. The underworld wasn't just a free-for-all. There were rules, unwritten, sure, but ironclad. Thieves had their own pecking order, with master thieves calling the shots over pickpockets and cut purses. Spies answered to handlers, who might report to a noble or even a foreign power. Assassins. They were the elite, trained in secret, bound by codes we'll dig into later. These weren't lone wolves, they were part of a machine, one that ran on loyalty, fear, and the promise of coin. But loyalty was a tricky thing. One slip, one double cross, and that creaky door you just slipped through might lead to a blade in your back instead of a payday. Let's linger on that fear for a moment, because it defined this life. You're not just hiding from the law, you're hiding from everyone. Your client might decide you know too much and tie up loose ends. Your partner might sell you out for a bigger cut. Even the shadows seem to watch you, waiting for a misstep. Every job came with a question, is this the one that gets me? That constant vigilance, that knot in your gut, it wore you down. Some turned to ale or worse to dull it. Others leaned into the rush, living for the moment when a plan came together, when you slipped away clean, leaving nothing but whispers. But no one stayed lucky forever. The underworld was a grinder, and sooner or later, it chewed everyone up. Before we move on, let's talk about something you might not expect, the tools of the trade. You're probably picturing a gleaming dagger or a black cloak, and yeah, those were real. But the underworld was cleverer than that. A thief might carry a thin strip of metal to pick a lock, crude but effective. A spy might use a scrap of parchment with coded symbols, meaningless to anyone but their handler. Assassins. They had their own tricks, poisons, garrotes, even disguises stitched to blend into a crowd. These weren't high-tech gadgets, they were born of necessity, honed by years of trial and error. Every tool told a story of survival, of someone who'd learned the hard way that preparation was the difference between life and death. As you stand in that alley, rain dripping off your hood, you're not just a shadow, you're a piece of something bigger. The medieval underworld wasn't just about stealing purses or spilling blood. It was about power, the kind that didn't show up in chronicles or tapestries. Every job you took, every secret you carried, it rippled outward, shaping the world in ways even you couldn't see. A lord's death might shift a kingdom's borders. A stolen letter might spark a war. You were small, sure, but you were never insignificant. And that's what made this life so brutal, so thrilling, so human. Let's get real about what it was like to live as one of these shadowy killers. Imagine you're waking up, if you can call it that, before dawn in a cramped, drafty room above a butcher's shop. The air smells of stale straw and faintly of blood from the shop below. Your bed is a pile of sacks stuffed with straw, itchy and lumpy, barely keeping the cold from the stone floor. You don't sleep much anyway. Every creak of the building or shout in the street jolts you awake, your hand instinctively reaching for the dagger under your cloak. You're already exhausted, but there's no time to linger. Today's job has been brewing for weeks, and it starts now. You pull on your clothes, ruffled tunic, patched hose, a cloak that's seen better days. Everything's designed to blend in, to make you forgettable. You splash icy water on your face from a cracked basin, grab a crust of bread that's more grit than grain, and slip out into the pre-dawn chill. Your first task is reconnaissance, and it's not glamorous. You're headed to a noble's manor on the edge of the city, where your target, a merchant with too many enemies, will be dining tonight. You take the long way, sticking to back streets where the cobblestones are uneven and the shadows are thick. The city's waking up now, carts rumbling, dogs barking, but you move like a ghost, head down, steps silent. You're freezing, the damp from last night's rain still clinging to your cloak, but you can't afford to shiver. Shivering draws eyes. You find a spot across from the manor, a narrow alley choked with refuse, and settle in to watch. Hours pass. Your legs cramp, your stomach growls, but you don't move. A servant comes and goes. A guard yawns at the gate. You memorize every detail, the rhythm of their patrols, the creak of the side door, the flicker of candlelight in an upstairs window. This is your life, waiting, watching, blending into the background like a stain on the wall. Let's talk about that blending in part, because it was an art form. By midday, you're in the city's market, a chaotic sprawl of stalls and shouting vendors. The air's thick with the smell of fresh bread, rotting fish, and unwashed bodies. You're here to tell your target, who's haggling over a bolt of cloth. You weave through the crowd, just another face in a sea of faces, your cloak pulled tight to hide the dagger strapped to your thigh. Markets were perfect cover, too loud, too crowded for anyone to notice you, but they were also a nightmare. One wrong move, one bump into the wrong person, and you're exposed. You keep your eyes on the merchant, noting his habits, the way he gestures when he's annoyed, the guards trailing him, the purse he tucks into his belt. Your heart's pounding, but your face is blank. You're not just hiding from him, you're hiding from everyone. A pickpocket might spot you as competition. A guard might sense trouble. Even the old woman selling apples could be a spy. Paranoia. Sure. But it's what keeps you alive. This wasn't a 9-to-5 gig. When you weren't stalking or staking out, you might be training, and that was its own kind of hell. Picture slipping out of the city at dusk, heading to a hidden clearing in the woods or a forgotten cellar beneath a tavern. Your master, an older assassin, scarred and grim, doesn't care that you're hungry or tired. He's teaching you to move silently, to climb a wall without a sound, to strike a target before they even blink. You practice with a dagger, a garrote, even your bare hands, until your muscles scream and your knuckles bleed. He makes you run through the same drill 100 times, slip past a guard, scale a rope, disappear into the dark. One night, he blindfolds you and spins you around, then tells you to find your way back to the city. You stumble, you curse, but you learn. Because if you don't, you're dead. Training wasn't just about skill, it was about breaking you down, forging you into something sharp and unyielding. Let's get real about the toll this life took on you. Physically, it was brutal. You're not eating well, bread, maybe some thin stew if you're lucky, but never enough. Malnutrition gnaws at you, making your bones ache, your teeth loosen. Stealth meant crouching for hours, climbing rickety walls, or running from guards, and that wrecked your body. twisted ankles, torn ligaments, cuts that never quite healed. They were your badges of honor, if you can call them that. One bad fall from a roof could leave you limping for life, and there was no medieval urgent care to patch you up. If you got sick, you either shook it off or you didn't. And the cold. It was your constant companion, seeping into your joints as you waited in alleys or hid in unheated attics. You were young. Most assassins didn't live past their 30s, but you felt old, your body a map of scars and aches. The mental strain was even worse. Imagine living every day knowing you're one mistake from death. You're not just watching your target, you're watching your back, your sides, the shadows behind you. Every face in the crowd could be a threat. Was that tavern keeper listening too closely? Did that beggar see you slip into the alley? Your mind was a coiled spring, always ready to snap. Sleep was a luxury you couldn't afford, even in your straw bed. You dreamed of blades and footsteps. Trust was a myth. Your client might pay you to kill, then pay someone else to kill you. Your partner on a job might sell you out for a bigger cut. You learned to read people, every glance, every twitch, but you never let them read you. Loneliness was part of the deal. Friends. Family. Those were liabilities. You were a ghost, even to yourself. Let's pause for a weird little fact that shows how desperate this life could get. Some assassins used poisons made from crushed apple seeds. Sounds almost quaint, right? Except those seeds contain cyanide, crude, unpredictable, and slow. You'd grind them into a paste, maybe mix it with wine or slip it into a stew, but it wasn't like the movies where the victim keels over in seconds. It could take days for the poison to work, days where your target might linger, coughing, sweating, while you waited in the shadows, praying they didn't figure out who dosed them. And if you messed up the dose, maybe they'd survive, and you'd be the one running for your life. It's a grim reminder of how assassins had to make do with whatever they could scrounge, turning something as simple as an apple into a weapon. The risk of betrayal was everywhere. Let's say you've got your plan down pat. You know your target's routine, you've got your poison or your dagger ready, and you're set to strike tonight. But what if your client's playing a deeper game? Maybe they hired you to fail, to take the fall while they look innocent. Or maybe your contact, the one who passed you the target's name, got greedy and tipped off the city guard for a reward. Capture was a nightmare. If you were lucky, it was a quick hanging. If you weren't, you'd face torture, hot irons, the rack, things we won't linger on because, you know, bedtime vibes. Even if you escaped, you'd be marked. A brand on your face, a clipped ear, signs that screamed criminal to anyone who saw you. You'd spend the rest of your days hiding, always looking over your shoulder, never safe. So why do it? Why live this way, when every day was a gamble and every job could be your last? For some, it was desperation. You were born poor, maybe an orphan, with no land, no trade, no future. The underworld was a way out, or at least a way to eat. For others, it was ambition, a chance to brush against power, to matter in a world that ignored you. And for a few, it was just who they were. The thrill of the job, the rush of outsmarting your target, it got in your blood. But whatever your reason, you needed resilience, the kind that let you wake up every day and face the cold, the fear, the loneliness. You weren't a hero, not even close. You were a survivor, and that took a kind of strength most people couldn't fathom. Let's walk through the climax of your day. It's night now, and you're back at the manor. The merchant's dinner is in full swing, laughter and clinking goblets spill from the windows. You've chosen your moment, the side door, left unlatched by a bribed servant. You slip inside, heart hammering, the familiar weight of your dagger at your side. The hallway's dark, lit only by a single candle, its flame trembling like your nerves. You move silently, years of training guiding your steps. Up the stairs, past a sleeping guard, to the merchant's chamber. He's alone, hunched over a ledger, oblivious. This is it. Your hand tightens on the dagger. But then, a floorboard creaks. His head snaps up. Your eyes meet. For a split second, the world stops. Do you strike? Do you run? Every choice is a thread, and you're pulling the one that might unravel your life. We won't say what happens next, not yet. Because the truth is, every job was a roll of the dice, and you never knew if you'd walk away. What mattered was that you kept going, day after day, through the hunger, the pain, the fear. You were a shadow, but you were alive, and in a world where most people were just pawns, that was something. The medieval assassin's life wasn't about glory or riches. It was about endurance, about finding a way to keep moving when everything was stacked against you. And somehow, you did it. How did this chaotic underworld hold together without falling apart? Picture yourself in a dank cellar beneath a tavern, the air thick with the smell of mold and spilled ale. It's your first night as a real assassin, not just some street thief with a knife. You're kneeling on the cold stone floor, a single candle flickering, casting jagged shadows on the walls. In front of you is your master, a grizzled killer with eyes like flint, and a handful of others, their faces half hidden under hoods. They're not here to welcome you with a handshake or a pat on the back. No, you're here to swear an oath, one that'll bind you to this life until it ends, probably sooner than you'd like. You mutter the words, promising secrecy, loyalty, and obedience, your voice barely steady. The master cuts your palm with a dagger, just deep enough to sting, and you watch your blood drip onto the floor. This isn't a ceremony, it's a warning. Break the code, and that blood won't be the last you spill. Let's clear up a myth right off the bat. You've probably heard stories of medieval assassin guilds, like something out of a fantasy novel, secret societies with grand halls and coded handshakes. Sorry to burst the bubble, but those didn't exist, not really. The medieval underworld wasn't that organized. Instead, it was a loose network of criminals, assassins, spies, thieves, held together by unwritten rules and mutual fear. Think of it like a shady family business, not a corporation. In a city like Paris or Florence, you'd have clusters of these networks, each tied to a powerful patron, a noble, a merchant, sometimes even a bishop. These patrons called the shots, handing out jobs and coin, but they didn't get their hands dirty. That's where you came in, the sharp end of the stick, bound by a code that kept everyone in line, from the lowliest pickpocket to the deadliest killer. So, what were these rules? First and foremost was secrecy. You didn't talk about your jobs, not to your drinking buddy, not to your lover, not even to yourself in a dream. A loose tongue was a death sentence. If you got caught and spilled names, you weren't just risking your own neck, you were putting everyone in the network at risk. And trust me, they'd find you before the city guard did. Then there was loyalty, but not the warm and fuzzy kind. You were loyal to your patron, the one who paid for your blade, and to your master, the one who trained you. Disobeying either was like spitting in the wind, it'd come back to hit you hard. Finally, there was the rule of competence. You had to get the job done, clean and quiet. Botch a hit, and you weren't just a failure, you were a liability. These rules weren't written down or voted on in some underworld parliament. They were forged in blood, passed down through whispers and scars. These codes shaped every part of your life, like a cage you couldn't see but could always feel. Let's say you're working for a patron, a minor noble who wants his rival's trade routes disrupted. He doesn't care how you do it, as long as it's done. You spend weeks planning, tailing the rival's caravans, maybe slipping a dagger into a key guard's back. Every move you make is guided by the code. You don't tell anyone, not even the thief you bribed to get you a map of the routes. You stay loyal to your patron, even when a better offer comes from a rival noble. And you make damn sure the job's clean, no witnesses, no loose ends. But loyalty cut both ways. Your patron might praise you today, but if you became a problem, he'd toss you to the wolves without a second thought. You were a tool, not a friend, and the code made sure you never forgot it. The hierarchy in these networks was another layer of control. You weren't equals with your master or the other assassins. Picture a pyramid. At the top were the patrons, the ones with the gold and the crutches. Below them were the master assassins, the ones who'd survived long enough to call shots and train others. Then there were the journeymen, like you, competent, but still proving yourself. At the bottom were the apprentices, kids or desperate drifters learning the trade, often used as bait or messengers. You answered to those above you, no questions asked. If your master told you to climb a castle wall in a thunderstorm, you climbed. If a patron wanted a job done by dawn, you didn't sleep. Defying the hierarchy wasn't just disobedience, it was suicide. The code ensured everyone knew their place, like stones in a crumbling wall. Now, let's talk about what happened when you broke the code, because failure wasn't just a bad day at the office. Punishment was swift and brutal, designed to send a message. If you were lucky, you got exiled, kicked out of the city, your name blacklisted, your life as an assassin over. You'd spend your days as a beggar or a mercenary, always watching for the blade you knew was coming. Less lucky, you'd be branded, a hot iron searing a mark into your cheek or hand. That mark wasn't just pain, it was a scarlet letter, telling everyone you were a traitor to the underworld. No tavern would serve you, no thief would work with you. And if you really screwed up, say, by talking to the guard, you'd be hunted. Not by the law, but by your own kind. They'd find you in a back alley, a forest, a crowded market. No trial, no mercy, just a quick blade and a shallow grave. To bring this to life, let's dive into a story from 14th century Florence, where the code's fragility was laid bare. Florence back then was a powder keg, rival families like the Medici and Albizzi clawing for power, their feud spilling into the streets. Our assassin, let's call him Matteo, was hired by a lesser noble to take out a rival merchant who'd been undercutting prices. The plan was simple: slip into the merchant's villa during a feast, poison his wine, and slip out. Matteo bribed a servant to leave a side gate unlocked, a common trick. He spent days preparing, memorizing the villa's layout, blending into the market to watch the merchant's habits. The night of the feast, he moved like a shadow, cloak tight, dagger hidden. He got inside, found the wine, and added a drop of hemlock, slow but reliable. But here's where it went wrong. The servant, sensing a bigger payday, sold Matteo out to the merchant's guards. As Matteo tried to leave, the gate slammed shut. Torches flared. Swords were drawn. Matteo fought, but he was 1 against 10. They dragged him to the city square, branded his face, and left him for the crowd to cheer. The code had held him up, but it also crushed him when he stumbled. That Florence fiasco shows how the code was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it kept the underworld running. Secrecy meant patrons could trust you with their dirtiest secrets. Loyalty meant you die before betraying them. Competence meant the job got done, and the network stayed in business. But the code also kept you in check. It demanded perfection in a world where perfection was a fantasy. One bribed servant, one loose word, and your life unraveled. The punishment wasn't just about you, it was a warning to everyone else. Step out of line, and the shadows you hid in would swallow you whole. It's no wonder assassins were paranoid. You weren't just watching for guards or rivals, you were watching your own allies, wondering who'd be the one to sell you out. Let's zoom out and think about how these codes actually worked in practice. They weren't enforced by some shadowy council in a secret lair. Enforcement came from the network itself, like a living thing. If you broke the code, word spread faster than wildfire. Taverns, markets, even churches became places where whispers carried your death sentence. The master who trained you might slit your throat himself, not out of anger, but because the code demanded it. Your patron might hire another assassin to tie up loose ends. Even the lowliest thief knew to shun you, because helping a traitor was as good as painting a target on their own back. The code wasn't just rules, it was the glue that held this chaotic world together, a fragile balance of fear and loyalty that kept the underworld from eating itself. But the code wasn't all about punishment. It also gave you something to cling to, a twisted kind of purpose. When you swore that oath in the cellar, you weren't just promising to kill, you were joining something bigger. The network gave you jobs, protection, a place in a world that didn't care if you lived or died. Loyalty to your patron meant coin in your pocket, maybe even a shred of respect. Secrecy gave you power, the kind that came from knowing things others didn't. In a society where peasants toiled and nobles schemed, you were a shadow, but you were a shadow that mattered. The code was harsh, but it was also a shield, a way to survive in a game where everyone was playing for keeps. Let's talk about how these networks communicated, because it's wilder than you'd think. You didn't exactly send a letter saying, "Meet me at midnight to kill Lord so-and-so." Instead, you used codes, subtle, clever, and sometimes downright weird. A mark scratched on a tavern table might tell you where to meet your contact. A phrase whispered in a market, "The hawk flies at dusk," could confirm a job. Some assassins carried tokens, like a chipped coin or a ring, to prove their identity. These weren't high-tech spy gadgets, they were born of necessity, passed down through years of trial and error. If you got caught with a coded message, you'd better hope you could eat the parchment before the guard read it. This system wasn't perfect, misread a signal, and you might walk into a trap, but it kept the network alive, a secret language spoken in glances and whispers. The code's real genius was how it balanced chaos and order. The underworld was a mess, rival networks, double crosses, greedy patrons, but the code kept it from spiraling into anarchy. Secrecy protected everyone, not just you. Loyalty ensured patrons kept hiring, which kept coin flowing. Punishment weeded out the sloppy, the disloyal, the weak. It wasn't fair, but it worked. In a city like Florence, where power shifted with every dagger, the underworld was a machine, and the code was its engine. It let assassins like you operate, striking from the shadows, tipping the scales of power without ever stepping into the light. But it also chained you, reminding you that freedom was a dream you'd never wake up to. Let's linger on that Florence story for a moment, because it's a perfect snapshot of the code's limits. Matteo's mistake wasn't just trusting the servant, it was assuming the code would protect him. He followed the rules, he kept the job secret, stayed loyal to his patron, planned ahead with care. But the underworld wasn't a place for trust. The servant's betrayal wasn't personal, it was business, the same way Matteo's job was business. When the guards caught him, they didn't just punish him, they made an example. His branded face was a message to every assassin in Florence. The code is all you have, and it's not enough. You had to be sharper, luckier, better than the world you lived in. And most weren't. So, how did this system last? How did the underworld keep spinning, despite the betrayals and the bloodshed? It came down to necessity. Patrons needed assassins to do what armies and laws couldn't. Assassins needed patrons to survive. The code was the thread that tied them together, fragile but strong enough to hold. It wasn't about honor or morality, it was about pragmatism. In a world where power was a knife's edge, the underworld was a tool, and the code was what kept it sharp. You might hate the rules, curse the oath you swore, but you followed them, because the alternative was worse. You were a shadow, but you were a shadow with a purpose, and that was more than most could claim. As you slip through the city now, the night deeper than ever, you feel the weight of the code on your shoulders. It's in every step you take, every glance you avoid, every job you finish. You're not just an assassin, you're a cog in a machine, bound by rules that both protect and cage you. The tavern's long gone, its lanterns snuffed out, but the shadows are still your home. You've survived another night, but you know the code's watching, waiting for you to slip. And somewhere out there, someone's watching too, a patron, a rival. survival, a traitor. The code keeps you alive, but it's also a chain, and you'll never be free of it. Guy de Lusignan, a medieval king who played a deadly game with assassins as his pawns. Picture yourself in Acre, a bustling port city on the coast of the Holy Land, around 1190. The air smells of salt, sweat, and the faint tang of blood, remnants of the Third Crusade raging nearby. The streets are packed with Crusader knights, merchants haggling over spices, and pilgrims praying for salvation. You're not here for prayer, though. You're slipping through the crowd, your hood low, carrying a message for a man at the heart of this chaos, Guy de Lusignan, King of Jerusalem, or at least he was until things went south. Guy's not what you'd expect from a king. No golden crown, no shining armor. He's a lean man with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, his French accent thick from his Poitevin roots. He's charming when he needs to be, ruthless when he has to be, and right now, he's in deep. His kingdom's crumbling, his allies are circling, and the whispers say he's turning to the shadows, to keep his head above water. Let's rewind a bit to understand who Guy was, because this guy's story is wild. Born around 1150 in western France, Guy was a nobleman's son, ambitious but not exactly destined for greatness. He was a second-tier knight, handsome and bold, who caught the eye of Sibylla, sister of the King of Jerusalem. By 1180, he'd married her and, through a mix of luck and scheming, became King of Jerusalem in 1186. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? Not so fast. The Holy Land was a mess. Muslim forces under Saladin were closing in, Christian barons were bickering, and Guy wasn't exactly a military genius. His big moment, the Battle of Atin in 1187, was a disaster. Saladin crushed his army, took Jerusalem, and left Guy a king without a kingdom. By 1190, he's in Acre, clinging to scraps of power, with rivals like Richard the Lionheart and local lords ready to shove him off the board. This wasn't a guy who could afford to play nice. So, what drove Guy to the underworld? Survival, plain and simple. The Crusades weren't just holy wars, they were a political shark tank. Every lord, knight, and bishop was jockeying for position, and loyalty was as fleeting as a desert mirage. Guy had enemies everywhere. Saladin wanted him dead, Richard distrusted him, and the barons of Jerusalem thought he was a lightweight. To stay in the game, Guy needed an edge, something beyond swords and diplomacy. That's where the whispers start, rumors that he turned to assassins, spies, and shadowy fixers to do what his army couldn't. These weren't the romantic cloaked killers of legend. They were men like you, hardened by the code, ready to slip a dagger or a rumor into the right place for the right price. Guy didn't invent this game, but he played it like a master, or at least he tried. Let's set the scene for how this worked. You're in Guy's makeshift court in Acre, a stone hole smelling of damp and incense, lit by flickering torches. The place is tense, knights whispering, clerks scratching at parchments, and Guy at the center, his face calm but his eyes scanning every shadow. You've been summoned through a contact, maybe a merchant who owes Guy a favor. The job's vague but urgent. A rival baron's been stirring trouble, rallying support to strip Guy of his title. Guy doesn't say kill him, he's too smart for that. Instead, he slides a purse of silver across the table and mutters about removing obstacles. You nod, knowing the code. Secrecy, loyalty, competence. You'll watch the Baron, find his weakness, and make it look like an accident. A fall from a horse, a bad cup of wine, a bandit attack. Guy's hands stay clean, and you walk away richer if you don't get caught. This wasn't just about one job. Guy's whole strategy leaned on the underworld. Espionage was his lifeline, spies eavesdropping in taverns, reporting on Saladin's troop movements or Richard's plans. Targeted killings were trickier but not unheard of. A troublesome knight might vanish on a patrol, a rival's advisor might choke on his supper. The Crusades were a perfect cover. War, disease, and bandits made deaths easy to explain. Guy Guy's motivations weren't greed or cruelty, they were desperation. He'd lost Jerusalem, his crown, his reputation. Every day was a fight to prove he belonged on the chessboard. The underworld gave him moves he couldn't make in the open, like a hidden dagger in a duel. But it came at a cost. Every job you took for him tied you to his fate, and Guy's luck was running thin. Now, let's zoom in on the big moment, the one that sealed Guy's shadowy reputation. It's 1192, and Guy's no longer king of Jerusalem. Richard the Lionheart and the Crusader lords have sidelined him, giving the crown to Conrad of Montferrat. But Guy's not done. Through a deal with Richard, he's been granted Cyprus, a rugged island that's more a backwater than a prize. It's a fresh start, but it's not secure. Cyprus is crawling with local lords, exiles, and mercenaries, all eyeing Guy's new throne. The whispers say Guy didn't just negotiate his way to power, he cleared the path with blood. The story goes that a key rival, a Cypriot noble with too much influence, met an untimely end. Maybe a fall from a cliff, maybe a poison chalice. No one saw it coming, and no one could prove Guy's hand. But the timing was too perfect, and the rumors pointed to assassins, you, or someone like you, sent to ensure Guy's grip on Cyprus. Here's the catch, the evidence is thin, like smoke you can't grab. Medieval chroniclers, like Ambrose or the Itinerarium Peregrinorum, don't mention assassins in Cyprus. They paint Guy as a flawed but devout crusader, not a mastermind of murder. But rumors don't need proof to stick. In the 12th century, assassin was a loaded term tied to the Nizari Ismailis, a Muslim sect feared for their targeted killings. Calling Guy a patron of assassins was an easy way to smear him, especially among rivals who wanted him gone. Still, the story fits. Cyprus was a rough place, and Guy was a man with everything to lose. If he did hire killers, it wasn't out of malice, it was strategy, the kind of cold calculation that kept him alive when others fell. You, slipping through Cypriot alleys, were just the tool he needed. Let's walk through what that job might have looked like. Picture Cyprus in 1192, a sun-scorched island of dusty hills and olive groves. You're in Famagusta, a port town buzzing with trade and tension. The target's a noble who's been rallying locals against Guy, threatening to spark a revolt. You've spent weeks blending in, maybe posing as a sailor, your dagger hidden under a patched tunic. You watch the noble's habits. He drinks at a tavern by the docks, rides the same path home every night. The job's simple but brutal. Make it quick, make it quiet. You pick a moonless night, the air heavy with salt and heat. As he stumbles from the tavern, you strike, a blade between the ribs, gone before he hits the ground. By dawn, the town's buzzing with talk of bandits or curses, and Guy's rifle is gone. You slip away, silver in your pocket, knowing you've just tipped the scales of power. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Working for Guy was like dancing on a tightrope. His enemies were everywhere, and his allies weren't much better. If you got caught, he denied knowing you, standard for patrons, but it stung. The code you lived by, secrecy, loyalty, meant you couldn't expect loyalty in return. And the rumors didn't help. If word spread that Guy was using assassins, it painted a target on his back and yours. Rivals might hire their own killers to retaliate, turning Cyprus into a shadow war of blades and whispers. You had to be flawless, invisible, because one slip could bring down not just you, but Guy's whole fragile empire. The underworld was a tool, but it was a dangerous one, like a fire that could burn the hand holding it. Let's talk about why Guy leaned on the underworld, because it's bigger than just one man. The medieval world was a snake pit, especially during the Crusades. Power wasn't just about armies or castles, it was about information, influence, and fear. Patrons like Guy didn't hire assassins because they were evil, they did it because they had to. Open warfare was costly and risky. Diplomacy was slow and unreliable. But a well-placed dagger, that was surgical, deniable, effective. exile, practical was all that mattered. There's a weird footnote here that's worth mentioning. The Crusades weren't just a clash of swords, they were a cultural crossroads. Crusaders like Guy rubbed shoulders with local mercenaries, some of whom knew tricks from the Islamic world, like the Nizari assassin's stealth tactics. You might have learned a thing or two, like how to use a garrote or blend into a crowd of pilgrims. It wasn't exactly a friendly exchange, more like a grim trade school, but it made you deadlier. Guy, always the opportunist, would have seen the value in that. He didn't just hire killers, he tapped into a network that stretched across cultures, a shadow economy of death that thrived in the chaos of war. But let's not paint Guy as a mastermind. He was a survivor, not a genius. His time in Cyprus wasn't a triumph. He died in 1194, barely 2 years after taking the island, his legacy a mix of grudging respect and lingering scandal. The assassin rumors followed him to the grave, maybe because they were true, maybe because they were too juicy to ignore. Either way, they tell us something about the medieval world. Power wasn't just held by kings and knights, it was shaped by shadows, by men and women like you who worked in the dark. Guy's story shows how the underworld wasn't separate from the real world of politics, it was woven into it, a hidden thread in the tapestry of history. Let's reflect on what this means for you, the assassin in the shadows. Working for Guy wasn't just a job, it was a gamble. Every coin you took tied you to his fate, his enemies, his risks. You weren't just killing for silver, you were propping up a man whose crown was slipping. And yet, you did it. Maybe for the money, maybe for the thrill, maybe because it was all you knew. The underworld gave you purpose, but it also used you, just like Guy used it. You were a tool, a weapon, a whisper in the night, and your work changed the course of kingdoms, even if no one ever knew your name. That's the paradox of this life. You are invisible, but you are never insignificant. As you slip away from Famagusta's docks, the sea lapping at the shore, you feel the weight of Guy's world on your shoulders. The job's done, the noble's gone, and Guy's grip on Cyprus is a little tighter, for now. But the shadows are restless, and you know this game never ends. The stars above are the same ones that watch Jerusalem fall, and they'll watch you too, as you move from one job to the next. Guy's story is just one piece of a bigger puzzle, a world where assassins like you were pawns in silent wars that shaped history. Let's pull back the curtain on the bigger stage, medieval espionage, where spies, double agents, and killers like you are the hidden gears of history. Imagine you're in Venice, 1250, standing in a marble hall that smells of salt water and wax. The city's a labyrinth of canals and secrets, its palaces glittering but its alleys dark with intrigue. You're not an assassin tonight, you're a spy, dressed as a minor clerk, your eyes scanning a banquet where Doge Marino Morosini is toasting Genoese merchants. Your job? Eavesdrop on their trade talks, catch any hint of a plot against Venice. The room's alive with laughter and clinking goblets, but you're on edge, every smile a potential mask. Medieval espionage wasn't about cloaks and daggers, okay, sometimes it was, but it was really about power. Kings, nobles, and cities like Venice didn't just fight with armies, they fought with secrets, and you were the one stealing them, planting them, or burying them. This was the silent war, and you were on its front lines. Let's set the stage, because this was a wild time. The medieval world was a chessboard, and every player, kings, popes, city-states, was out for blood. Europe in the 13th century was fractured, the Holy Roman Empire was bickering with the Pope, England was tangled in civil wars, and Italian cities like Venice, Genoa, and Milan were basically their own mini-empires, each ready to stab the other in the back. Open warfare was expensive and messy, so the real battles happened in the shadows. Nobles hired assassins to take out rivals without starting a feud. Cities sent spies to sabotage trade routes or steal military plans. And everyone used betrayal like a currency. You, Whether you were slipping a dagger into a lord's chamber or passing a coded note in a market, or a pawn in these power struggles, your life hanging on the whims of those above you. Let's start with the nobles, because they love their dirty tricks. Picture England in the 1140s, during the anarchy, a civil war between King Stephen and Empress Matilda that turned the country into a free-for-all. Barons were like mini-kings, building castles and picking sides, but they didn't always fight fair. Say you're a knight with a grudge against a rival lord who's been raiding your lands. Marching an army is risky, so you hire someone like you, a killer who can slip into his castle during a feast, spike his wine, and vanish. The next morning, he's dead, and everyone blames bad oysters or God's wrath. This wasn't rare. Chronicles from the period, like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, hint at sudden deaths of inconvenient lords, often with no explanation. You're the explanation, a shadow who kept the nobles' hands clean while tipping the scales of power. Cities took it to another level, and Venice was the master. Venice in the 13th century wasn't just a pretty city with gondolas, it was a trade empire, raking in gold from spices, silk, and slaves. But Genoa, its rival, was always nipping at its heels. The two cities didn't just clash at sea, they played a colder game. Venice's Council of Ten, a secret group that ran the show, had a network of spies stretching from Constantinople to Cairo. You might be sent to Genoa, posing as a merchant, to sniff out their next trade deal. Or maybe you're planting rumors that a Genoese captain's been bribed, sparking distrust. The Venetians were ruthless. Chronicles like those of Martino de Canale talk of agents who disrupted enemy plans, and you were one of them, dodging knives and double crosses to keep Venice's coffers full. But here's where it gets messy, double agents. These were the wild cards of the silent wars, and they could ruin everything. A double agent wasn't just a spy who flipped, they were a walking disaster, someone who'd take your coin, nod at your orders, then sell you out to the highest bidder. You're in a tavern, passing a coded note to your contact, thinking you're setting up a hit on a rival noble. But what if your contact's already whispered your plan to the target? Suddenly, you're not the hunter, you're the prey. Double agents thrived because trust was a myth. They played every side, pocketing silver while the world burned. And nowhere was this clearer than in the 13th century Milanese conspiracies, a perfect storm of betrayal that shows just how high the stakes were. Let's dive into Milan, 1250s, because this is where the silent wars got downright operatic. Milan was a battleground for two factions, the Guelphs, who backed the Pope, and the Ghibellines, who sided with the Holy Roman Emperor. These weren't just political parties, they were blood feuds, splitting families, streets, and cities. The Delatorre family, Guelphs, ran Milan, but the Visconti, Ghibellines, were plotting to take over. Both sides used spies and assassins like chess pieces. You're working for the Delatorre, tasked with killing a Visconti ally who's been rallying support. You've got a plan, slip into his villa, use a garrote, and stage it as a robbery. But your contact, a merchant who swore loyalty, is a double agent. He's been feeding your moves to the Visconti, who've set a trap. You walk into the villa, and instead of a sleeping target, you find armed guards. The plan's dead, and so are you if you don't run. This wasn't a one-off. Milan's conspiracies were a web of double crosses. Chronicles like the Annals Mediolanensis describe plots unraveling because of traitors within. One famous case involved a Guelph plot to poison a Ghibelline leader during a 1259 banquet. The assassin, bribed with gold, got the poison ready, crushed apple seeds, slow but deadly. But a servant, promised a bigger payout, tipped off the target. The banquet went on, the poison was never served, and the assassin was found floating in the Naviglio Canal, a warning to others. Double agents didn't just foil plans, they shifted power. By the 1260s, the Visconti were clawing their way up, thanks to well-placed betrayals. You, caught in the middle, were just collateral damage in a war fought with whispers. Let's talk about how these silent wars worked, because it's wilder than you'd think. Spies didn't have fancy tech, no earpieces or encrypted apps. They used what was at hand, coded letters hidden in wax seals or written in invisible ink made from lemon juice. You might carry a ring with a chipped edge to prove your identity, or whisper a phrase like "the moon rises at noon" to signal a meet. Meetings happened in plain sight, markets, churches, even brothels, because crowds were the best cover. And the players? They weren't all shadowy types like you. Clergy were prime spies, thanks to their access to courts and confessions. A monk might overhear a lord's plans and pass them to a rival. Women, too, were key, noblewomen or servants who could eavesdrop without suspicion. The silent wars weren't just men's games, they were everyone's, and that made them deadlier. The stakes of these wars were insane. A single leak could change history. Let's say you're spying in Venice and uncover Genoa's plan to ambush a trade fleet. That tip saves Venice millions in gold, strengthens its navy, and shifts the balance of Mediterranean trade. Or in Milan, a double agent's betrayal might hand the city to the Visconti, locking the Guelphs out for decades. These weren't just local squabbles, they rippled. A noble's death in England could tip the anarchy, letting Matilda's son, Henry II, take the throne and shape Europe. A Venetian spy's report could sink Genoa's economy, paving the way for Venice's golden age. You were small, a shadow in a tavern, but your work was a pebble that started avalanches. But being a pawn in these wars was brutal. You're not just dodging guards or rifles, you're dodging your own side. Your patron might burn you to cover their tracks. Your contact might sell you out for a better deal. And if you're a double agent, you're playing a game where one wrong move means a blade in the dark. The stress was relentless. You didn't sleep, not really. Every creak was a threat, every stranger a potential traitor. You lived on scraps of trust, knowing they could crumble any second. And yet, you kept going, because the silent wars didn't stop, and neither could you. Whether it was for coin, survival, or the thrill of being the one who knew, you were in too deep to walk away. Let's zoom back to that Milanese conspiracy, because it's a perfect snapshot of the chaos. Imagine you're the double agent this time, working both the Guelphs and Ghibellines. You're in a smoky tavern, passing a coded note to a Visconti spy while pretending to drink with a Guelph captain. You're promising both sides the same thing, intel that'll crush their enemies. But you're not loyal, you're playing for the highest bidder, or maybe just to stay alive. The Guelphs trust you to set up the poison plot, the Ghibellines trust you to foil it. You walk a razor's edge, knowing one slip means you're dead. When the servant betrays the plot, you're the one who tipped him off, pocketing Visconti gold. But now the Guelphs are hunting you, and the Visconti don't trust you either. You're running, always running, a shadow even among shadows. What's crazy is how normal this was. Betrayal wasn't the exception, it was the rule. In Venice, the Council of 10 kept lists of suspected double agents, and they weren't shy about removing them. In England, barons during the anarchy bribed each other's spies, turning loyalty into a joke. The silent wars thrived on this chaos because distrust kept everyone sharp. Patrons needed spies to win, but they never trusted them. Spies needed patrons to survive, but they always had one eye on the exit. And you, whether you were a killer, a spy, or a double agent, were caught in the middle, your life a tightrope over a pit of knives. The code we talked about earlier, secrecy, loyalty, tried to hold it together, but in the silent wars, even the code bent under the weight of betrayal. So, why did these wars matter? Because they weren't just about one city or one noble, they shaped the medieval world. Venice's spies helped it dominate trade, laying the groundwork for its Renaissance glory. Milan's conspiracies gave the Visconti power, setting up centuries of Italian power plays. England's shadowy killings during the anarchy paved the way for the Plantagenet dynasty, which redrew Europe's map. You weren't just a cog in a machine, You were the spark that lit fuses. And the craziest part, no one knew your name. Chronicles praised kings and knights, but the silent wars, fought by shadows like you, were the real game changers. A whisper in a tavern could do what 1,000 swords couldn't. Let's reflect on what this meant for you. You're not just a spy or an assassin, you're a thread in a tapestry, woven into the fabric of history. Every job you took, every secret you carried, sent ripples across kingdoms. But it came at a cost. You lived in a world where trust was a trap, where every ally was a potential enemy. You weren't a hero, not even close. You were a survivor, navigating a war where the battles were fought in silence and the casualties were forgotten. The silent wars gave you purpose, but they also burned you out, leaving you with nothing but scars and secrets. And yet, you kept moving, because that's what shadows do. They endure, even when the light tries to erase them. How did you, an assassin, make death look like a whisper? Picture yourself in a cramped attic in Florence, 1350, the air thick with the smell of damp wood and something sharper, herbs, maybe, or something worse. You're hunched over a rickety table, a single candle flickering, casting shadows that dance like your nerves. On the table are your tools, a mortar and pestle, a vial of murky liquid, a dagger so small it could hide in your palm. You're not just an assassin tonight, you're a craftsman, and your art is death. The medieval underworld didn't have tech manuals or spy shops. Your technology was whatever you could scrounge, steal, or learn from someone shadier than you. Poisons, concealed weapons, disguises, these were your paintbrush, your chisel, your lifeline. And every time you used them, you were gambling with your own life as much as your targets. Let's start with poisons, because they were the rock stars of assassination. Forget the movies where a drop of glowing liquid kills in seconds. Medieval poisons were messy, unpredictable, and often homemade. You had a few good options, each with its own quirks. Hemlock was a classic, easy to find, growing wild in ditches, but it was slow, sometimes taking hours to paralyze and kill. You'd crush its leaves or seeds into a paste, maybe mix it with wine, and hope your target didn't notice the bitter taste. Arsenic was another favorite, mined from the earth and sold by shady apothecaries as rat poison. It was faster, causing vomiting and convulsions, but it wasn't subtle. People noticed when someone started frothing at the mouth. Then there was belladonna, or deadly nightshade, with its shiny black berries that could stop a heart if you got the dose right. Each poison was a tool, but none were foolproof, and all came with a catch. They could kill you just as easily. Crafting these poisons was no walk in the park. You didn't have a chemistry degree or a sterile lab. Your lab was a corner of an attic, a back room in a tavern, or a forest clearing if you were desperate. You learned the trade from apothecaries, alchemists, or maybe an older assassin who'd survived long enough to teach. Apothecaries were your best bet. They were the pharmacists of the medieval world, mixing herbs for fevers or wounds, but also dabbling in darker stuff. You'd slip into their shop at dusk, posing as a healer's apprentice, and trade silver for a lesson in grinding hemlock or distilling arsenic. Alchemists were trickier. They were half scientist, half mystic, obsessed with turning lead into gold, but they knew their toxins. You'd barter for their secrets, maybe offering a stolen relic or a favor. Either way, you were learning on the fly, and mistakes were deadly. The process itself was a nightmare. Let's say you're making a hemlock poison. You start by gathering the plant carefully, because touching it too long could make you dizzy. Back in your attic, you chop the leaves, your hands sweating, knowing one slip could mean breathing in the dust. You grind it into a pulp with your mortar, the sharp smell burning your nose. Then you mix it with wine or honey to mask the taste, stirring slowly to avoid splashing. Every step is a risk. Spill it on your skin, and you're nauseous for days. Inhale the fumes, and you're on the floor, gasping. Chronicles like those of John of Salisbury mention poisoners dying from their own brews. Accidental self-poisoning was so common it was practically an occupational hazard. You're not just crafting death, you're dancing with it, and one wrong step could end the show. But poisons were only half the game. Sometimes, you needed something more direct, a blade. Medieval assassins didn't carry broadswords or flashy rapiers. Your weapon was a dagger, small enough to hide under a cloak or in a boot, sharp enough to slit between ribs. These weren't just knives, they were works of art in their own way, forged by blacksmiths who knew the underworld's needs. You might have a stiletto, thin as a needle, perfect for a quick thrust and a quiet exit. Or a misericord, a mercy dagger designed to finish off wounded knights but just as good for a sleeping target. You'd spend hours owning it, the rasp of the whetstone a kind of meditation. But carrying a dagger was risky. Get caught with one and a noble's all, and you're not explaining your way out. So, you got creative. That's where disguises came in, and trust me, they were nothing like Hollywood spy flicks. No latex masks or instant costume changes. Your disguise was whatever made you invisible in a crowd. A patched cloak and a limp could turn you into a beggar, ignored by guards. A monk's robe, stolen from a monastery, got you through church doors, no questions asked. If you were bold, you might use a false beard or a hood tied to match a servant's livery. Women assassins, and yes, there were plenty, had an edge here, slipping into noble houses as maids or wet nurses, their weapons hidden in baskets or sewn into skirts. The trick wasn't looking different, it was looking like you belonged. You studied your target's world, their servants, their routines, their blind spots, and became part of it, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, let's talk about one of the coolest tricks in your arsenal, hollowed-out books. This is the kind of thing that makes you realize how clever the underworld was. Castles were fortresses, bristling with guards, locked gates, and suspicious stewards. Getting a weapon inside was like threading a needle in a storm. So, you turned to something no one suspected, a book. You'd take a thick manuscript, maybe a Bible or a ledger, and carve out its pages to create a hidden compartment. Inside, you'd stash a dagger, a vial of poison, or even a garrote, a wire for strangling, silent and brutal. You'd carry it openly, posing as a scholar or a clerk, and breeze past the guards, who'd never think to check a dusty tome. Once inside, you'd slip into a quiet corridor, retrieve your tool, and do the job. It was risky. If a guard got curious, you were done. But when it worked, it was genius. Let's walk through how this might play out. Imagine you're targeting a lord in a French castle, 1320. He's got enemies, rival nobles, maybe a king, and you've been hired to make him disappear. The castle's a maze of stone, with archers on the walls and dogs in the courtyard. You can't just stroll in with a dagger. So, you spend weeks preparing. You visit an apothecary in a nearby town, trading a stolen ring for a vial of arsenic. Back in your hideout, you grind it into powder, your hands wrapped in cloth to avoid the dust. You test it on a rat to make sure it's potent, grim, but necessary. Then you carve out a prayer book, hiding the vial and a stiletto inside. On the night of the job, you dress as a traveling scribe, your book tucked under your arm. The guards barely glance at you. Scribes are harmless, right? You're in, but now the real work begins, finding the Lord, dosing his wine, and getting out before anyone notices. This kind of ingenuity wasn't just about tools, it was about mindset. The medieval underworld didn't have resources or safety nets. You were poor, hunted, and often alone. Every job was a puzzle, and your tools were the pieces you cobbled together. Poisons came from plants you foraged or powders you bartered for. Daggers were stolen or forged in secret. Disguises were patched together from rags or pilfered clothes. Even the hollowed-out book was a desperate hack, born from the need to outsmart a world that wanted you dead. You weren't a scientist or an engineer, you were a survivor, and your craft was a testament to that. Every vial you filled, every blade you hid, was a middle finger to the odds stacked against you. But let's not romanticize it. This life was brutal, and your tools were as dangerous to you as to your targets. Besides self-poisoning, there were other risks. A dagger could slip in a fight, cutting you instead. A disguise could fail. A guard might notice your servant doesn't know the castle's layout. And that hollowed-out book. If a steward decided to flip through it, you'd be in chains before you could blink. The chronicles are full of failed assassins, men and women caught with files or blades, branded, exiled, or worse. The Liber Pontificalis mentions a 14th century plot where a poisoner was caught because his arsenic spilled, leaving a trail. You had to be precise, paranoid, and lucky, and even then, the margins were razor thin. There's a weird parallel here to medieval alchemy. Alchemists were chasing gold, mixing potions in smoky labs, half hoping, half guessing. You were doing the same, but your gold was a clean kill. Both of you were experimenting, risking everything on trial and error. An alchemist might blow up his lab, you might poison yourself. But you both kept going, driven by necessity and a kind of stubborn brilliance. The underworld wasn't just a place, it was a mindset, a crucible where desperation forged innovation. You learned to turn weeds into weapons, books into arsenals, rags into disguises. It wasn't pretty, but it was yours, a craft that let you slip through the cracks of a world that didn't want you. Let's zoom back to that Florence attic, because it's a perfect snapshot of your world. You're finishing the poison, the arsenic powder now a fine dust in a clay vial. Your hands shake, not from fear but from focus. One wrong move, and you're dead before the job starts. You test the dagger's edge, sharp enough to cut silk, and slide it into the hollowed-out book, its pages carved with a knife and a prayer. Your disguise is ready, a merchant's tunic, stolen from a market stall, with a hood to hide your face. You're not just preparing tools, you're building a plan, each piece a thread in a fragile web. The Lord's banquet is tomorrow, and you'll be there, a shadow among the candles, your tools the only thing between you and oblivion. This is your art, and it's as beautiful as it is brutal. So, why did this matter? Because your tools weren't just about killing, they were about power. Every poison you brewed, every dagger you hid, tipped the scales of history. A lord's death could spark a war, end a feud, or shift a throne. Your craft gave nobles, cities, even kings the ability to strike without being seen. But it also showed the world's underbelly, the place where desperation met ingenuity. The underworld wasn't glamorous, but it was clever, turning scraps into weapons, shadows into threats. You were proof that even the smallest player could cast a long shadow, as long as they had the right tools and the guts to use them. Let's reflect on what this meant for you. You're not just an assassin, you're an artist, in a twisted way. Your canvas was the dark, your medium was death, and your masterpiece was survival. Every tool you used was a story of necessity, a testament to a world that forced you to be more than you were. You weren't born a killer, you were made one, shaped by hunger, fear, and the need to matter. Your poisons, your daggers, your disguises, they weren't just weapons, they were your voice, speaking in whispers that changed the world. But they came at a cost. Every job you took, every risk you ran, carved a piece of you away. You were ingenious, but you were also alone, a shadow even to yourself. How you shaped kingdoms, sparked legends, and got turned into the cloaked superheroes of modern movies. Picture yourself in a medieval market square, 1350, the air thick with the smell of bread, sweat, and livestock. You're not working today, just watching, blending into the crowd, your cloak plain, your dagger hidden. Around you, merchants haggle, kids dart through the chaos, and a storyteller's voice rises, spinning a tale of a shadowy killer who struck a lord and vanished like smoke. The crowd gasps, half thrilled, half terrified. That's you, or at least, the myth of you. Assassins weren't just killers in the medieval world, you were power brokers, ghosts who tipped the scales of history. Every job you took, every life you ended, sent shockwaves through courts, cities, and kingdoms. You didn't just serve patrons like Catalusignan, you shaped the world they fought for, even if no one ever sang your name. Let's start with your impact on medieval society, because it was huge, even if it was hidden. You weren't just a hired blade, you were a tool of politics, a surgical strike in a world of blunt wars. Take a noble's death in 12th century England during the anarchy. You slip into a castle, poison a baron's wine, and by morning, he's gone. Seems simple, right? But that death sparks a succession crisis, his land split between feuding heirs, and suddenly, a civil war shifts. Chronicles like the Justice Stephanie hint at these convenient deaths, never naming you but pointing to your work. In Italy, your blade might end a Guelph leader in Milan, handing power to the Ghibellines and reshaping the city for decades. You didn't start wars or sign treaties, but you cleared the path for those who did, a shadow pulling strings no one saw. Your work didn't just change politics, it changed how people felt. You inspired fear, and fear was power. In a tavern, a merchant whispers about a lord killed in his bed, no trace of the killer. In a church, a priest preaches against devils in the dark, meaning you. That fear kept people in line. Nobles hired more guards, locked their doors, tasted their wine twice. Cities like Venice tightened their spy networks, knowing you could strike anywhere. But fear also birthed folklore. Storytellers turned you into legends, hooded figures who can walk through walls, servants of kings or demons. The 13th century romance of Alexander includes tales of assassins slipping into camps, blending myth with truth. You were real, but to the medieval mind, you were half monster, half magic, a shadow that haunted their dreams. That fear had a flip side, it made you valuable. Patrons, kings, nobles, even popes, needed you because you could do what armies couldn't. A war might cost a fortune and fail, your dagger was cheap and final. In the Crusades, as we saw with Guy de Lusignan, you were a trump card, removing rivals without a battlefield. In Florence, a merchant might hire you to kill a competitor, securing his trade empire. You were the medieval equivalent of a drone strike, precise, deniable, and terrifying. But you weren't just a weapon, you were a message. When a lord died in his sleep, everyone knew it wasn't chance. Your work whispered, cross the wrong person, and no wall, no guard, no prayer will save you. That message kept power in check, a grim balance in a chaotic world. Let's fast forward to see how your shadow stretched into later periods, because your legacy didn't fade with the Middle Ages. By the Renaissance, espionage and assassination were becoming an art form, and you were the blueprint. Cities like Venice and Florence turned your gritty tricks into statecraft. Venice's Council of Ten, which we talked about, formalized spy networks with agents trained in your methods, codes, disguises, silent kills. Florence, under the Medici, had its own shadow operatives, as chronicler Francesco Guicciardini notes, handling delicate matters for the family. But the real star here is Niccolò Machiavelli, the 16th century writer who turned your world into philosophy. In The Prince, he doesn't name assassins, but he's all about the kind of ruthless pragmatism you live by. Strike fast, stay hidden, let fear do the work. You weren't in his books, but you were in his logic, the ghost behind his words. Machiavelli's world wasn't just about ideas, it was practical. Renaissance states built on your foundation. England's Elizabeth I had spy masters like Francis Walsingham, whose agents used your old tricks, coded letters, hidden blades, even poisoned gloves, as rumored in plots against Mary, Queen of Scots. In France, Catherine de' Medici was linked to assassins targeting Huguenot leaders, echoing your medieval hits. These weren't lone wolves anymore, they were systems, with budgets and hierarchies, but they owed you everything. Your hollowed-out books, your hemlock files, your ability to vanish, these were the seeds of modern espionage, planted in the medieval dark. You didn't live to see it, but every Renaissance spy was your heir, carrying your craft into a new age. Now, let's jump to today, because your legacy legacy is still alive, just not the way you'd expect. Modern pop culture loves assassins, but it's got you all wrong. Think of the games, Assassin's Creed with its hooded heroes leaping from rooftops, or movies like John Wick, where killers are slick, unstoppable machines. These aren't you. You aren't a ninja superhero with a cool costume and a moral code. You are hungry, scared, probably half sick from a bad winter. Your gadgets were a rusty dagger and a prayer. Your missions weren't about saving the world, they were about coin, survival, or a patron's grudge. The romanticized assassin is a fantasy, polished by centuries of stories that forgot the grit. Real assassins, like you, didn't get statues or sagas, they got graves, if they were lucky. That gap between myth and reality is fascinating. Why do we love the idea of you so much? Maybe it's the allure of the shadow, the lone figure who bends history without a crown. Medieval folk felt it too, spinning tales of your impossible feats. By the 19th century, novels like Alexander Dumas' account of Monte Cristo were weaving assassins into epic dramas, all mystery and revenge. Today, every video game assassin has a sleek outfit and a tragic backstory, a far cry from your patched cloak and empty stomach. But that myth keeps you alive. Every time someone boots up a game or watches a spy flick, they're touching your world, even if they don't know it. You're a ghost in their stories, haunting the edges of their imagination. Let's bring it back to a specific moment to see your legacy in action. Picture Paris, 1307, the court of King Philip IV. You're hired to take out a troublesome bishop who's been stirring unrest, maybe linked to the Templars Philip's about to crush. You slip into his chambers with a vial of arsenic hidden in a hollowed-out Bible and dose his evening wine. By dawn, he's dead, and the court's in chaos. That single act strengthens Philip's grip, paving the way for his Templar purge, which reshapes European finance and power. You're gone, vanished into the alleys, but your work echoes. A century later, Renaissance spies cite cases like this, unnamed, of course, when building their networks. By the 21st century, that bishop's death is a footnote in a game, a shadowy plot point for a digital assassin. One job, one night, and it ripples through time, from medieval courts to modern screens. But let's not forget the cost, because your legacy isn't just about power or myths, it's about you, the human behind the blade. Your life was a grind. You didn't choose this world, it chose you, maybe poverty, maybe a debt, maybe a moment of desperation. Every job took something. Your health, from crouching in cold alleys, your sanity, from constant paranoia, your soul, from knowing each kill made you less human. The code we talked about, secrecy, loyalty, kept you alive but caged you. You sacrificed everything, family, safety, even your name, for a world that spat on you. Chronicles might mention a lord's death, but you're a blank, a shadow history forgot. That's the real price of your legacy. You changed the world, but it cost you everything that made you human. That sacrifice is what makes your story so heavy. You weren't a villain or a hero, just someone trying to survive in a ruthless world. You had dreams once, maybe a farm, a family, a life in the light. But the underworld took them, one job at a time. You became a tool, a whisper, a means to an end. And yet, you endured. You found ways to keep going, sharpening your dagger, brewing your poisons, dodging the noose. That resilience is your true legacy, not the myths or the politics. You were a survivor, and every kingdom you shaped, every legend you sparked, was built on your ability to keep moving, even when the world wanted you gone. Let's linger on that Paris job, because it's a perfect lens for your legacy. When you left the bishop's chambers, you didn't know you'd helped Philip IV tighten his grip. You didn't know his Templar purge would shift wealth to the crown, fueling wars that redrew Europe. You didn't know Renaissance spies would study your methods, or that gamers would one day play as your echo. You were just trying to get paid, to live another day. But that's the thing about your work, it was small in the moment but massive in time. Every blade you drew, every vial you poured, was a pebble in a pond, sending ripples you'd never see. You are invisible, but you are never insignificant, a paradox that defines your place in history. So, why does this matter? Because your legacy shows us the hidden side of history. We read about kings and battles, but you were the undercurrent, the shadow that made the light possible. You didn't just serve power, you shaped it, bending the course of nations from the dark. And you paid for it, not with glory, but with pieces of yourself. The Renaissance built on your tricks, the modern world mythologized your life, but neither saw the real you, the hungry, haunted soul who made it all happen. Your story reminds us that history isn't just about the names in books, it's about the ghosts in the margins, the ones who carried the weight and got no credit. We're stepping out of the medieval dark to see how those themes live on, from modern spies to hidden criminals, all playing the same old game you knew so well. Because it's bigger than Florence or the 14th century, it's human. Secrecy, loyalty, survival, these were the heartbeat of your life. You hid in alleys, your name a secret even from your allies, because one slip could mean a noose. You swore oaths to patrons like Guy de Lusignan, knowing loyalty was a chain, not a choice. And survival. That was the air you breathed, every job a gamble to see another dawn. These weren't just your struggles, they're the threads that tie us to the past. Every human, in every age, has wrestled with what to hide, who to trust, and how to keep going when the world feels like a trap. You are an assassin, but you are also us, carrying the same fears and hopes under a different sky. Secrecy was your shield, wasn't it? You moved through markets, your face a mask, your plans locked tight. That need to hide hasn't gone away, it's just changed clothes. Today, secrecy is the currency of espionage, where agencies like the CIA or MI6 guard their moves like you guarded your dagger. They don't use hollowed-out books anymore, they've got encrypted files, satellite feeds, and burner phones. But the game's the same, keep the truth close, because one leak can topple a mission, or a government. Think of a modern spy, slipping into a foreign capital, their cover as a diplomat as flimsy as your monk's robe. They're not so different from you, dodging surveillance instead of watchmen, but still living in that razor-thin space where trust is a luxury they can't afford. Then there's loyalty, the double-edged blade of your world. You served patrons, followed codes, but loyalty could betray you, a bribed servant, a double agent, like we saw in Milan's conspiracies. Today, loyalty still binds and breaks. In organized crime, think of a cartel enforcer swearing allegiance to a boss, knowing a rival's offer or a cop's pressure could flip them. They're not chanting oaths like your underworld guilds, but they're caught in the same dance, serve, obey, but always watch your back. Even in legal worlds, say, a corporate whistleblower, they face that medieval choice, stay loyal to the system or risk everything to break free. Your world taught us that loyalty isn't a warm promise, it's a contract, signed in whispers and paid in blood. And survival, God, that was your fire. You endured cold, hunger, the constant threat of capture, all for another day, another coin. That fight's still here, just wearing a new face. In modern espionage, a field agent risks their life in a hostile territory, not for glory but to come home. In organized crime, a low-level runner dodges raids and rifles, scraping by in a world that chews up the weak. Even outside the shadows, survival drives us. Think of someone working 3 jobs, hustling to keep the lights on. It's not daggers or poisons, but it's the same grit, the same refusal to break. You, crouching in a Florence alley, or their ancestor, proof that humans can endure anything if the spark of survival burns bright enough. Let's dive into those modern parallels, because the underworld you knew as cousins today, even if the tools have changed. Start with espionage. Back in your day, Venice's Council of 10 ran spy networks that could make or break trade empires. Now, picture Langley, Virginia, 2025, where CIA analysts pore over data intercepts, tracking threats across continents. They're not brewing hemlock or slipping through canals, but they're playing your game, gathering secrets, planting lies, sometimes ordering a removal that echoes your dagger's work. The stakes are global now, cyber wars, nuclear risks, not just a nobles feud, but the core is the same. Information is power, and those who control it, like you did, hold the strings of history. Organized crime's even closer to your world, just shinier. Imagine a modern cartel running drugs across borders. They've got drones, encrypted chats, and accountants laundering millions, but strip it down, and it's your underworld reborn. They have codes, like your oaths of secrecy. Break them, and you're dead. No branding needed. They use enforcers, your spiritual heirs, who take out rivals with a bullet instead of arsenic. And betrayal. It's as deadly as ever. Just like that Milanese double agent who flipped for gold, a cartel member might turn informant, only to end up in a ditch. The tech's new, GPS trackers, not hollowed out books, but the rules haven't changed. Stay sharp, stay loyal, or pay the price. There's a key difference, though, and it's worth chewing on. Your world was small, local lords, city rivalries, maybe a Crusades fallout. Today's stakes are massive. A spy's leak could spark a global crisis. A cartel's war could flood cities with violence. Your tools were crude, a dagger, a vial, a stolen cloak. Modern players have satellites, AI, and labs that make your apothecary look like a kid's chemistry set. But here's the kicker, the human cost hasn't changed. You pay with your health, your peace, your name. Today's spies and criminals pay with burnout, prison, or a bullet. The toys are fancier, but the toll, fear, isolation, the weight of secrets is the same. You'd recognize their eyes, that haunted look of someone who's seen too much and said too little. Let's ground this in a moment, because it pulls everything together. Picture you, in 1350, slipping a poison chalice to a Florentine merchant, tipping a trade war in your patron's favor. Fast forward to 2025, a hacker in a dimly lit room leaks encrypted files, exposing a corrupt CEO, shifting markets overnight. Both of you are shadows, acting in secret, loyal to a cause or a paycheck, fighting to survive a world that doesn't care. Your poison took hours, their code takes seconds. Your job changed a city, theirs might shake a nation. But the thrill, the dread, the quiet after, it's the same. You're centuries apart, but you're kin, bound by the underworld's eternal rules. Move fast, stay hidden, and hope you're on the right side of the blade. Now, let's shift gears, because we've been in the dark too long, and this story needs light. Close your eyes and picture a medieval village at dawn, somewhere in the English countryside, 1400. The air is crisp, smelling of dew and fresh-baked bread. Roosters crow, soft light spills over thatched roofs, and the village stirs, milkmaids humming, a blacksmith's hammer starting its rhythm. The night's dangers, the shadows where you moved, are gone, melted by the sunrise. A church bell rings, slow and steady, calling folk to morning prayers. This is peace, the world you never got to keep, where secrets sleep and loyalty is a neighbor's smile. You, the assassin, were born from the night, but this dawn reminds us, even the darkest lives touched something brighter, something human. That village is our anchor, a place to rest after the journey we've taken. We started in a rainy medieval city, meeting the underworld of assassins, spies, and thieves. We lived your brutal days, learned your codes, and followed patrons like Guy de Lusignan through the Crusade shadows. We saw the silent wars of courts, the craft of poisons and stealth, and the legacy you left in politics, myths, and modern stories. Through it all, we found those threads, secrecy, loyalty, survival, tying your world to ours. That village at dawn is where we land, a reminder that history isn't just about the blade or the plot, it's about the people, the ones who fought, fell, and faded, leaving whispers we still hear. Let's reflect on why this matters. Your life was harsh. No medieval HR department, no retirement plan, just a dagger and a prayer. But it was human. You hid secrets because you had to, not because you wanted to. You stayed loyal, even when it burned, because it was all you had. You survived against odds that would break most, because something in you refused to quit. Those struggles are ours too. We hide our own secrets, fears, dreams, doubts. We wrestle with loyalty to family, friends, or causes that don't always love us back. And we fight to survive, whether it's a job, a loss, or just the grind of life. You're not just a figure from history, you're a mirror showing us the strength and cost of being human. That's the gift of your story, and it's why we've spent these nights together. From Florence's alleys to Venice's canals, from Crusader courts to modern shadows, you've shown us a world that's brutal but alive, hidden but vital. The underworld wasn't just a place, it was a proving ground, where secrecy forged plans, loyalty built bonds, and survival carved legends. Today's spies, criminals, even everyday hustlers, they're your heirs, walking paths you cut through the dark. And that village at dawn, it's the promise that every shadow leads to light, every struggle to rest. You didn't get that rest, but we can, carrying your story as we drift into sleep. Let's hold that village in our minds. The sun's climbing, painting the fields gold, and the world feels soft, safe, whole. You're not there, you never were, but your life made it possible. Every job you took, every risk you ran, shifted the world just enough for others to find peace. History doesn't name you, but it feels you in the quiet moments when the night fades and the day begins. Drift off, dreaming of those hidden lives, the ones who shaped history from the shadows. Good night, and sleep well.